November 2018, and we went from that small amount of folks that sat in the chair to 54 participants total. And what I thought was going to be a 90-minute doc to a 6-hour doc. But that's sort of the story of how it all came to be.
I also want to talk about the rollout. So the decision that was made to roll it out over a consecutive period of nights, back to back to back to back, as opposed to one episode at a time per week, and what those conversations sounded like when you had the finished product and you were deciding how to schedule it.
It was a little tricky for me internally, and I'll just be honest about this. The person who hired me left, the CEO who said don't worry about it left, and then I got a new boss and I got a new CEO. So it's sort of rocky roads for anybody who's on our side of the table. When there's great transition, you don't know what's going to get cut. We were also at an interesting time in production where we kept saying we were going to end, but then we never ended. So it was like, keep going, shoot this, someone else, sit down, get them in the chair. And for a long time, I didn't have that much to share internally in terms of we didn't have a host team that was all over this for a duration of a year and a half. That's kind of impossible to do on this type of budget. So I had a couple of clips, and I kept showing those same clips over and over and over and over again. And everyone's like, okay, she says there's something here or something here, but everyone's sick of me at that point, right? And it's hard to decide how you're going to create a rollout strategy just based on a couple of clips and not understanding how the full how the full creative was going to roll out. And we didn't know. It was like a jigsaw puzzle without the front of the box. You were just putting together pieces as you got them and collecting them. You had no idea what it was going to end up like. So in terms of the strategy, I just have to give a credit to our programming and strat team, our research teams, who said this was probably the strongest way to do it and one of the strongest weeks to do it, where there was a lot less competition out there. But
you all feel about the rollout?
Yeah, I at first thought that we should have 6 weeks. I didn't get the wisdom of getting all of your shots at once when you go to the doctor. And that's basically what it was. I mean, the other thing that we did that I wanted to speak to, and we committed to this early on, was we teamed with 15 organizations who deal with sexual and gender violence all of the time and have been for years. People one of the organizations actually made a viewing curriculum that was really helpful. They partnered with us on social media, of course. So there was a viewing guide to this. There were people who were hosting without us, making the suggestion at all. Actually, they anticipated that this might be hard to watch, and they were hosting viewing parties where there were sometimes professionals and experts present. And I think all of those things were really important too. I didn't, like Kitty, I had no idea that this would have the impact. I mean, when you're on this side, we're 6 months later, and tens of millions of people have watched it, it seems like a foregone conclusion, but this man, I think now is 52 years old. We actually released this during his birthday weekend, which I didn't mind. And he turned 52, and he hasn't had a real hit in more than a decade. He was acquitted in 2008. The BBC did a documentary. They did, 2 of them. One that aired while we were in production that really hadn't gone anywhere, that hadn't hit. So I wasn't certain that this was going to be something that had impact. But watching it that first night on Twitter, we were very intentional about having partners. Bree had people come in and do the screening, and of course we had that kind of infamous screening where someone called in a gun threat. But yeah, by that first night, watching people watch it on Twitter, I knew that this was going to be big and that the conversations were going to be iterative, which is all that I could have hoped for.
I just want to build on that, as you mentioned, that gun threat at a screening or before a screening in December. There were also legal threats. Can you talk about all of your feelings during the time when his legal team was saying he was going to stop, whether or not there was any moment at all when the network felt like having cold feet, and what it was like for you to push back against that?
Well, I can say that legal kept coming to me asking me to corroborate information, and I just kept saying, I just told you guys this like 2 months ago, but I didn't understand because of course this is my first project, so I didn't understand like why I had to keep answering the same questions over and over again, like, do you have a witness? Or, do you have evidence? Things like that. And then when I started watching it, and then myself, and I forgot that I produced it, I'm just watching it as you guys watched it. I'm like, wow, like, what did the legal team say? I'm like, wait a minute, I did this. I'm like, oh, now it makes sense as to why I need to answer those questions over and over again, because I literally would just go back to my emails and copy and paste, because I already answered the question. But I understood now it's like a fact check thing, so that was like a big aha moment for me. And then I probably owe the legal team an apology, because I probably internally cursed them out a lot. Like, I already gave you this. Good.
I mean, what that was really important to us was that, we approached this with the idea that there was a 110% chance that he would threaten to sue us. And so we wanted to be airtight. I appreciate, Kitty feeling that I was empathetic, because I didn't think I was bringing my empathetic self to these interviews. I often felt like I was conducting a deposition. I had to ask follow-up questions that I didn't necessarily, I felt like a lawyer sometimes. Like, you'd have to say, did you call anyone after that happened? Are there witnesses? All of the kinds of questions that satisfy. I had to conduct these interviews, and I did cry in the hallways during the breaks for sure, but during the interviews, I had to basically produce a transcript that could be subpoenaed. And that was foremost in all of our minds on this project.
And I had to also go to Kitty, like, I know I asked you this, like, in February. Can I ask you again? She's like, okay. Remember?
Yeah, and then previously, before I had done the Lifetime, I had gone through a long legal process as well with Rolling Stone. So I had already had like pictures and text messages and abuse photos and friends and family that could corroborate stuff. So I don't know if they know, but I copied and pasted it too and sent the stuff over. I was like, okay, this is the same question. But I train myself not to get offended, because they do have to protect themselves, and that's a part of the business.
Yes, no, I think at Lifetime, despite, and I was actually really surprised, because I, again, new to the company, I definitely thought after the screening, there that project goes, but to the credit of our senior team, Paul Puccieri and Rob Chernow, Henry Overman, David Sternbach, they stood behind this project 100%, so thank God for them.
I want to go back now to talking about Dream. You said that you approached some of these interviews legally.